Good afternoon. Gee, my head looks big everywhere, doesn't it? Even on stage. Thanks for taking the time to attend our panel session this afternoon. We totally understand that we are the last session that's keeping you back from drinks, so we'll try to keep it, or definitely keep it on time. It's important to us, so we want to make this panel session as interesting and robust as possible. So we're not interested in a warm and fuzzy discussion. We're welcome to talking about controversial topics in the traceability space, and would welcome audience questions from you guys to quantify and qualify what we're talking about. For those of you that don't know GS1, just to set the scene, we're a global organisation. There's 114 GS1 member organisations around the world, all not-for-profit or a bit like a franchise. So I work for GS1 Australia. We have just on 20,000 members in Australia. Globally, there's 2 million companies that are a member of one of the 114 member GS1 organisations, and we cover off about 155 countries. So we are a global supply chain open standards. The standards that we develop are technology and solution provider agnostic. So we're interested in how they work, how they can be utilised by different solution providers out there. So on the subject of traceability, so it probably means different things to different people. So I head up our traceability engagement at GS1, and we sort of look at traceability from a number of key areas. In my 18 years with GS1, I've always worked in the food and beverage space, so in the meat, fresh produce sector in particular, and the wine sector as well, which is another passion of mine, which we'll leave to later on tonight perhaps. But I guess from a food safety perspective, and these are not GS1 figures, these are sourced from, this is from the Consumer Goods Forum, the Global Food Safety Initiative. So they estimate around 10% of the world population become ill after eating contaminated food. Here in Australia, think about the salmonella issue that we've had with some fresh produce items. Rachel will talk about the romaine lettuce recall in the US and the effects of that. So conservatively, they think contamination poses a potential threat of around $55 billion a year. Then let's move on to food fraud or anti-counterfeiting. This is European stats here, but around $25 to $33 billion every year. So in looking after the wine sector here in Australia, I deal fairly closely with GS1 France. We have quite spirited arguments about the quality of French wine versus Australian wine. He's quite stubborn in his beliefs, but I think the Australian wine is certainly catching up. But it's estimated that up to 70% of French wine in particular sold in China is counterfeit. If you're familiar with the Penfolds brand, for example, Google Penfolds and have a look at that. It is almost the identical Penfolds logo, but it's a B at the start. So fake wine being sold off is a premium Australian wine. Fish, you've probably heard about that. 33% of fish sold in the US alone is fraudulently labelled. So lots of things happening. On the positive side, we think somewhere, if we had an integrated traceability process across the wider food and beverage space, we think just in the fresh foods industry alone, we're thinking around a $3 billion saving there. Which, if you look from a retailer perspective, could equate to around $60,000 per store per year. So there is certainly some quantifiable benefits to be realised that we believe. You can't talk traceability without, I guess, the increasing needs for regulatory or the increasing onset of regulatory requirements. So what we want to cover off in the panel today is there too much or not enough regulation in this space? And welcome questions from you guys that work out in that sector of what your thoughts are. Particularly from an Australian perspective, where we are a big net exporter of our food and beverage products around the world. I do a lot of work in the meat sector and just dealing with those guys that are exporting meat to different countries around the world, the differing requirements that they face. On the technology slide, has anybody here not heard of blockchain? There are whole conferences dedicated to this topic. So this is a GS1 slide on blockchain, and I'm not going to spend 15 minutes going through it because every time I present on the slide, I present it differently. Other to say that blockchain is certainly a buzzword technology out there. It's getting a lot of hype. From my perspective, I think it's an exciting, innovative technology. But on the other hand, sometimes I think it's almost like it's a solution looking for a problem. But I welcome feedback from there, especially since we've got 3 blockchain solution companies up here as well. That's why I'll be sitting in this chair and not the one right next to them as we progress. But yeah, we're going to talk about technology and where it fits in the supply chain. So what I'd like to do now is we're just going to go, and we'll go from left to right. We'll just start with our panellists, get them to introduce themselves. You would have seen they've got their bios on the app and in the program, so we're not going to go through that. But a little bit of what their company does and a couple of implementations that they've done. So we'll start with Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Nabaa. I'm the VP of VeChain Technology, Southeast Asia and ANZ. So VeChain was founded in 2015 by Sunny Liu, and we've been building blockchain-based anti-counterfeit solutions in primarily luxury goods, in wine, and automobile, and we've slowly expanded into food. So we're a public blockchain, and I help my clients build their solutions either from scratch, or I actually find partners like potentially these three companies here, and then I help them build the solutions on top of the solutions provided by an approved vendor network. Yeah.
I'm David Inderias. I'm the co-founder of Fresh Supply Co. I actually have a background in medicine. I couldn't stand it, and I'm glad I changed to another field. I had a previous venture in ag. That's where I got my initial exposure, exited that. Was in manufacturing for the luxury goods sector, and I exited that. We went through the SpratX Accelerator, got seed funded, and raised capital. And basically, my take on blockchain is that fine, traceability is important, but a lot of the services out there are boring. I don't think consumers are fear-driven, and I don't think anti-counterfeiting drives most of consumer engagement. What we're focusing on Fresh Supply Co. is how do we make that product-connected digital space interesting, and how do we unlock further value at the retailer and the consumer end. Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Gabato. I'm the COO of Ripe.io, and we are funded by Maersk Ventures as well as RelishWorks, which is a large distributor in the US. We have a number of different types of individuals on our teams. We have food scientists, we have farmers, we have technology folks. Our 2 co-founders are actually from the fintech space, where they learned of blockchain and the application of blockchain to the food supply chain. We digitize essentially from farm to fork. So we have use cases where we work with farmers of carrots, of beets, of tomatoes, of hemp, of sugarcane, and then we follow that through the supply chain. We track the key events as well as kind of attributes around the soil condition, the temperature, humidity, the environment in which the food item was grown, all the way through to the consumer, where we also do kind of these sensory panels or these taste panels so that it has a feedback loop into the farmer, that they can understand what consumers value or find feedback in their food.
Very good afternoon. My name is Alan. I'm the founder of ProfilePrint. I'm the only non-blockchain company in today's panel. What we spent the last 2.5 years working on is to create rapid food analyzer that looks at authenticating and quality control of the food ingredient itself. So instead of looking at QR codes or hologram or other data, we focus on the actual product. And that's what we see a lot more value today in the last few months as we go to market. Was just in Sri Lanka last week, and one of the ambush tests that one client came to us and said, "Great, good job, Alan, you have this machine. Now, I throw you 6 samples, tell me which one's adulterated." Sounds scary at the start. Trusted the system, put it through the system, 3 seconds, we know exactly which one has been adulterated with sugar. And I think that is what we see as valuable moving forward, because we want to be able to add value not just to the end consumer, but throughout the entire supply chain stakeholders.
All right, thanks. We might actually start with the only non-blockchain solution provider up here, Alan. So molecular identification. So I think Star Trek and how you can explain how the transporter works from one place to another. We're breaking it down to the molecule. But I guess instances where you use it for to identify the tea or the regions of tea or olive oil or Manuka honey. Can you give some examples of what you're doing in that space and what the benefits are?
So currently our verticals has been in products that's been rampant adulteration and high value. So looking at tea, coffee, grains, traditional Chinese herbs like ginseng, goji berries. And one of the reasons why this happens is because the sensors 10 years ago were very expensive. And what has allowed us to be able to use these sensors that used to be very precise and expensive is exactly that the cost has come down, plus that the internet is readily available. And we combine that with chemometrics, which is really the study of molecules, and AI. So when you have AI, a sensor that was less accurate is now able to increase the accuracy significantly. So a simple identification of 6,000 data points in the past wouldn't tell us much things. But just in the last few years, because of quick data analysis and AI modeling, we're able to tell a lot more with 6,000 data points. So one example I'll give you would be in the case of where clients want to do a match. So traditionally in the space of tea, for example, so one of the verticals is tea, and today, a lot of them is highly dependent still on visual as well as taste to inspect the quality and the grading of tea. So to tell whether is it a region from Sri Lanka or from India or for the matter, a lot of them is adulterated with cheaper Indonesian or Vietnam tea, is actually by tasting it. So imagine how onerous and tiring it is to do this tasting. How many can you taste before you burn out, literally? So we saw that potential. It is not just about creating that authentication for end consumers, but improving the supply chain. So we are able now to learn from the tasters and create a model that straight away tell exactly what grade, origin, harvest date, and exactly what has been blended. And we're even able to reverse this process by looking at the blended product and guess what went into this blended product. So these are some of the examples that we could do using our technology.
And who's driving that? Is it driven by the consumer? As an example, here in Australia in the last few years, we've had oregano leaves, and I think there was 3 or 4 brands sold in retailers that were not 100% oregano leaves. There was substitutes that have been added. So is this type of technology been driven by the consumer, or is it more back up the supply chain by the distributor or even the brand owner manufacturer?
I believe as a young startup, we should all focus on what we're best at. I totally agree that it could range from consumers to businesses to even suppliers who have concerns about adulteration. But we just want to focus really between the consumers and the growers, because that's exactly where we see the volume of work that's required to authenticate and test the quality. And while we can see there will be pockets of people who are concerned about food adulteration, our view currently in the market is that the producers are more concerned about the brand reputation, more so than the consumers, because consumers still trust established brands a lot more.
Okay. Rachel. We had
Yes,
this,
Andrew.
So when I had a phone call with Rachel last week, and on the program it said she's from Australia. It turns out she was in California, so it was a very amenable 11 a.m. my time, which was 2:30 in the morning for her or something. So
I was just getting in for my night.
Let's look at romaine lettuce. So I work fairly closely with GS1 US in that space, and they use that as a really good example. They could identify the source or the site, the farm where the affected lettuce came from, but then they lost all visibility of where it went through the supply chain downstream. So how does the blockchain solution help in that instance?
Well, the blockchain solution, I mean, in E. coli, for example, you have that incubation period as well, right? Which causes a delay in some instances because, somebody gets sick, they wait 3 days, then somebody else gets sick, the CDC has to come in and do some analysis, and then they have to have a cluster. But the traceability of, from the supply chain, because now you're digitizing the farm, and then it comes in to the distributor, the processing plant, and then it goes out. And unless you have forensics within kind of the lettuce or the meat or whatever the food safety issue is, it's very difficult to trace all the way back to kind of the farm and the lot. But I think what happens today is that, there's an outbreak and all the lettuce in all the shelves in all of the US comes off and you can't sell it anywhere. Right, and so now what you're able to do is say this came from Yuma, Arizona because it was right next to a cattle ranch. And so now you can say, okay, here's to where that lettuce was processed and then just pull that lettuce from that region. So, it's not perfect. The data needs to be accurate 100%, but blockchain, because of the nature of it having one ledger, one record of transaction, allows you to trace that back from beginning to end.
But the wider industry repercussions there around consumer perceptions about the quality and safety of romaine lettuce.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if I was a consumer, there's nothing that says that, once the CDC said it came from Yuma, Arizona, there was nothing that informed a consumer that they felt this lettuce was safe because it didn't come from Yuma, Arizona. Right. And so I think the ability to now inform consumers that their food is safe or it doesn't come from that particular region, which a blockchain does because of the nature of the single record of transaction. I think that creates some confidence with the consumers to do that.
David, your thoughts in that space?
Look, my thoughts are traceability. In most cases, consumers don't care. Consumers care when something goes wrong. So I don't think that's really, look, we're all good at, if you step back and look at us, we're a centralized platform for multiple ERP integrations, right? And we really work at taking different data streams, reconciling them and pushing them to a blockchain and a permanent record. Fine, that's a technology problem. I'm more concerned with how do we make use of that digital space, that product connected digital space, because a lot of the time, again, it's underutilized and is boring. I mean, we've had a lot of success in terms of consumer engagement and conversions in Southeast Asia and Japan. I mean, a lot of people focus on China. China's a big market. It's not the only market. And as you look at Southeast Asia, there's going to be exponential growth. And really, I think those consumers, they're not looking for anti-counterfeiting. They're not looking for authenticity. They're actually looking for provenance and engagement with the brand. When they choose to purchase a more expensive good, they're buying into the provenance. Now, traceability matters, but I look at this like a hierarchy. I think traceability is ever present, but if all you're doing is selling anti-counterfeiting, I'm sorry, you're boring, right? The consumers, I've seen product experiences where consumers scan a bottle of honey, and what they see when they scan it is the bottle of honey. If that was me, I would never scan ever again. It's not a good product experience. It's how can you continue that journey? How can you buy other SKUs that are looking at real retail consumer data, continue that journey, right? That's when you find meaning, and that's where we are in these nascent stages. People haven't actually unlocked value in that digital space. Look at it commercially. If you are just imposing an additional cost without real near-term ROI. People don't want, especially when you start going at a super large enterprise level, they don't want an additional labor unit cost, right? And I'll tell you, we work with the largest grocer in Japan. They don't care about traceability. Japan, they don't care about traceability. They want content, and not a lot of people want to do content because content's hard to do, right? And creating a good consumer experience is hard to do. So, yeah.
All right. Nobody puts Sarah in the corner. In your role, looking after the whole Southeast Asia market and Australia, New Zealand, relatively small, not a growth area of the world. What are you doing? What are you seeing in this space?
Well, I think I agree with David. Yeah. Sorry. I agree with David that it's very market specific. For us at VeChain, we see food traceability as a very important market, especially in China, where food fraud is rampant, meat fraud, wine fraud, all of that is happening. And recently, Walmart China actually worked together with VeChain. We implemented a food traceability program. PwC was the one who was designing the processes, identifying the weak points, and then we're helping them track those products on the blockchain. And so Walmart had a problem, and the problem was that they had invested a lot, like over 700 million yuan on cold chain distribution centers, and they wanted to communicate all that information to consumers that they work with very responsible food producers. And so they have all this infrastructure, but how are they going to determine who was really the right producer for them? So they hired PwC, and then they came out with some strict guidelines, and they were able to assess who were the right producers to work with. And so we came out with this food traceability platform, and it's not just a proof of concept. It's already launched. 23 products were already tracked, and at the end of this year, it will be 100 more product lines. And towards the end of next year, it will be about 50% of packaged meat and 40% of packaged vegetables will also be tracked. So I think it's a huge benefit, especially to consumers in China. Yeah.
Okay. So if we take your point, David, where you would argue that does the consumer really care? So who pays for new technology traceability solutions like this? Is it because it's a cost burden by the farmer? Or is it the retailer pushing back on the supplier?
That's a good
or is
question,
it the consumer?
Because ultimately, you have to look at the commercials. You need to look at everything. Ultimately, comes down to the cost of acquiring a customer, right? So right now, again, if you've read Moore's Crossing the Chasm, early on, it's brands that want a competitive advantage, right? They may be getting ripped off, they may not be getting ripped off, right? But we are working on a new and novel model to what we hope will replace the traditional producer-paid model, drive down the cost of the track significantly, and make it accessible to all producers and subsidizing it another way. We think what we're working towards is we think it's a right of the consumer to be able to get authentic product and for traceability to be baked in. And I think that's kind of like a big goal that a standards body like GS1 wants to work towards. How can we make that the new normal? I think right now we're in the stage where it's a novelty, but really I think we all have big aspirations about how can we make this the new normal, right? I mean, beyond just traceability or counterfeiting, it should just be normal. It should be a right when you buy a product, and that's what we're working towards.
I think that's where I differ a little bit from David. I don't necessarily see that traceability solution is always additional cost, because in one form or another, most of us are already doing some kind of traceability solutions in our company today. And if we see such solutions and technology helping us as enablers to drive down costs, improve productivity, then it's no longer that the cost will be passed down to the consumers. In fact, the cost savings will be passed on to consumers. And that's how we see it, because whether we are now doing grading by visual or we're using some form of testing lab, and we can find better solutions to improve this way of how we handle checking, authentication, and traceability, actually, I can potentially see quite a bit of savings. Back to you, David.
Well, I will respond and say, hey, the visibility, a lot of our clients have gotten additional efficiency gains because they've got visibility about their processes, right? So they've identified, hey, there's an efficiency here, and by digitizing their workflow, look, we're looking for the most elegant solution. If there can be a hands-off approach where we can automate, feed one upstream data set to populate and furnish another one, take away a cost of doing additional labor cost. Yeah, sure, there can be a lot of impact. So yeah, we've experienced that firsthand. Yep.
So I've already broken the headset. So the feedback was just make sure you guys are staying awake during the session. Marco, in his address this morning, talked about collaboration and connecting the dots. We've got about 1,000 slides at GS1 that talk about that exact same thing. So there's no single player in a supply chain. There's multiple stakeholders. If you look at the farm, a ripening shed or a pack house, through to the logistics and distribution, warehouse, wholesaler, if it goes into the markets, eventually into the retailer, into the consumer. How difficult is it to get stakeholder engagement right along that supply chain in any sort of traceability solution? Let's start with Rachel.
Yeah, so it is difficult. I think there's a number of challenges. One, when we're starting, we work with a fast casual restaurant called Sweet Green in the U.S., which their ethos is around locally sourced, sustainably sourced product. And, so they're working with these smaller producers that aren't digitized, that don't have systems, and they're trying to prove to their consumer that they have locally sourced, these farmers have really good practices. And so, part of what we do as part of our implementation is we bring the stakeholders into a workshop, and then we listen essentially to kind of what are the problems that they're trying to solve, or what value do they think they would benefit from having themselves on the ecosystem, right? And so, what's happened is we run these taste panels with Sweet Green, and then that feeds back into the farmer, so they find value in understanding how consumers actually what they think of their food profile or their taste profile. We're also working with the Dairy Farmers of America, which is an association in the U.S., and the National Pork Board, and they bring the ecosystem partners into our projects. But for them, it's about educating the consumer in the sense that pork producers kind of have a bad kind of reputation in the U.S. for how they manage the pigs and the hogs and in the environment. And so they're trying to prove kind of the sustainability aspects by animal welfare, by how they feed back into the local economy. And with the DFA, they're trying to focus on kind of high quality freshness of their milk product. And it's not easy. And so typically, to David's point, you have to find kind of these ecosystem partners that are a little bit more forward thinking and that want to participate. And then by virtue of that, we've gotten more of the kind of, quote unquote laggards to come onto the platform. And now it's kind of running into, and now they're all seeing the value of the system. But it does take time. It does take a lot of education. Most people, we go into a conversation and it's, how is this different than Bitcoin? And it's very different. We're on a private, we're on a permission blockchain, they're on a public blockchain. We have nothing to do with Bitcoin. So it's a still very early technology, and the learnings, there's a lot of education that needs to happen.
Can I also jump in?
No, you cannot.
So for instance, the Walmart case, right? The producers are kind of forced to be more digital and to submit paperless records keeping and all that. So how did Walmart incentivize these producers? Well, they promised them better ad space, more visibility, in the physical store. So I think when you're talking to stakeholders, you have to sit them down and then identify what motivates them and what can everyone offer on the table. If I'm a third-party logistics courier, maybe if being on the blockchain, I can ask for a 30-day payment instead of a 60-day payment, because on the blockchain everything is visible, everything is clear. So why should I wait 60 days when you can actually pay me on the spot even? So it really depends on what are the different stakeholders' motivations and how can everyone work together to achieve to make everyone more aligned.
I think this is a classic example of early adoption of technology. It's nothing new to us. I mean, we have seen it in the earlier days of floppy disks, and then we move on to USB drive and stuff like that. And effectively, if you're fast enough and you adopt the right technology, you win. But if you are not, you might lag behind. But if you are fast enough to adopt the wrong technology, then you lose. So I think that this struggle is normal and it's ongoing, and I think we are facing it almost concurrently with different technologies beyond just blockchain or beyond just IoT sensors. But I think what is important is for us to also identify the low-hanging fruits for each of them. So instead of only painting the big picture, which we know there's a vision, and that requires a lot more time, energy, and data collection, that is painful. Beyond that, we need actually to show them what they can do as quick wins. And I think that is the only way we are able to get on board. So our example for our technology is really that our sensors are as good as data. So if our data is weak and not qualified, no matter how accurate my sensors and my AI model is, it's going to be very inaccurate. So we spend a lot of time on collecting data. And one of the challenges we have is, how do we collect data? Because if I buy data, it might be inaccurate, and I spend a lot of money. How do I know whether this product that I buy is authentic in the first place, right? So we created a marketplace. So this marketplace sells things on behalf of the farmers. So the farmers sees it not as traceability or authentication. They see that, oh wow, I'm a farmer and you help me sell to developed countries. Sounds sexy, and you only collect a small commission. Wow, I don't mind, right? So there are farmers that sees that value. But as they do that, they have to send samples through our marketplace, and we collect data, do a fingerprint, and voila, that's how we collect our database in order to authenticate. So that's just one example of what we do to plug sort of the low-hanging fruits, while along the way paint to them the larger picture.
Okay. Two questions before I want to open it up to the audience, and it touches on what you raised around incentivizing the consumer. So in China, the consumer is very highly engaged when it comes to scanning QR codes. You walk around the exhibition hall today and a number of different solutions out there require an app of sorts or some sort of QR codes to scan. I put it to you that in Australia, we're not that mature when it comes to scanning QR codes. I don't think they're that mature in Singapore as well. And apps, I mean, are consumers really going to download an app to engage or scan a particular product? Is that going to work, or is it sort of, I'm of the opinion that apps are sort of going down the path like surveys. People get surveys for everything these days and you get a bit wary and you forget them. So how do we engage with the consumers these days, if not by those mechanisms or by some other mechanism?
So the question is, was around apps or like, look, I think we need to remove any barrier to adoption. I know you can go real wild down the anti-counterfeiting track and go, oh, I'm going to use NFC, but everything is really a balance between security and accessibility. Sure, something might be more secure, but if no one can access it, what's the point, right? So I think we have to find this balance, and this also touches on the question that was just asked previously. Is it easy to sell, right? Who is incentivized? All these questions kind of come together in that. To the right client, it's not that difficult to sell, but know who you're selling to. I mean, the speed of sales, enterprise sales cycles are way different than an artisan cheese producer who's got 2 employees, right? And then the beautiful thing is it's nascent stages, it's very early days. So I really like going and seeing, so the truth will come out in the wash, right? People will try different models and the market will tell us, and some people will sink or some people will swim. Is just counterfeiting good enough? It's important. Food safety is important, but there's a whole lot of other value to be unlocked. That's important. And I think of how, think of how badly the internet sucked in 1994, right? That's where we are now, right? So we're going to find out what is meaningful to consumers. Again, the media that I put out, how can I localize that efficiently? How do I incentivize consumers? On top of that, another thing we do is how can we give retailers and motivate them by, or producers as well, by allowing them to get the analytics around consumer engagement, SKU performance, overlaid in different geographical regions. That's important, right? So it's finding that additional value that doesn't come at a hugely additional cost. And understanding, especially when you talk to grocers like Walmart, understand how low their margins are, right? So you need to be able to make a good case, especially in the short to medium term. All the promises, consumer confidence. Yes, you'll get consumer confidence, but let consumer confidence, how do I quantify that on my quarterly report, right? Or on my annual report. So you have to make a good case, yeah.
Can I also jump in? So I think when it comes to rewarding consumers, you need to motivate them. So when you have a traceability project implemented, you also need to work very closely with your marketing team. You need to come up with a robust marketing program. How can you incentivize your consumer to scan that QR code? Maybe when I scan a QR code, I get some points or I get a discount. Or when you want them to scan the QR code, get exchange information, or maybe drop that bottle or the box in a recycling bin, can you reward them for the good behavior, for the sustainable efforts? So I think having a robust marketing program is essential. And then, like he mentioned, in my line of work, I meet a lot of different IoT producers, and they have all these super secure codes. But again, the consumer, they only have their smartphones and their Androids. What are they limited to? They're limited to cameras, and they're limited to NFC capability. They don't have access to huge machines where they can bring a piece of meat to it and identify whether it is verified, whether it's true. So when it comes to the consumer level, they only have the smartphones, and they don't want to download another app. That is true. So that's why the QR code right now makes more sense, because first I don't need to download an app to read a QR code. I can just scan it and I have all the information presented to me. So we're all limited by the consumers, and the only access they have is their smartphone. So we have to work around that at this point in time.
Any questions from the audience? I've been told there's microphones in each aisle that if you want to come up and ask a question, or you can just yell out, heckle from the back if you like.
Yeah, come on.
None yet. All right, saving up. Okay, well, should a traceability solution be seen as a competitive advantage, or is something for the good of the industry as a whole? And let's use here in Australia the strawberry needle contamination issues from last year, where sure it was initially one farm or one supplier, but the implications are wide-reaching right across the strawberry industry. If I could substitute strawberries for rock melons, for leafy greens, romaine lettuce. So yeah, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Or not?
Yeah, well, it's both. But think of this, it's kind of a common sense in selling. Commercials a lot more agile, right? They could write checks and they can, enact something in the next quarter, right? Unfortunately, we're motivated by, we are pushed to act when things are painful, right? And we see that there's a need, but it's both. But in early days, because it's so early, I think the market will tell us. There are a lot of companies that need to sink or swim so that we can find out the truth, right? And we can either iterate or those companies die, which then informs us to this is the right kind of recipe and this is what my consumer needs. So I really do like that. Hey, we're out here, we're all having a go, right? And seeing what is the best option, what format and what recipe makes sense, and then we can apply it from a compliance standard, right? Because again, it's a dream to say, hey, I'm going to go capture this retailer and we'll just make you comply and push this down as a cost of doing business. That's okay. But ultimately, when contracts are up, you think they're going to renew if they didn't get ROI, right? So that's what that's kind of my feedback to that question.
I mean, I agree. I think it's both. I think, blockchain technology came out and it was supposed to solve kind of all the food safety issues. And it's kind of been positioned as, the be-all, end-all of technology for the supply chain visibility. I think there's other kind of influences as to whether or not blockchain is going to solve everything. I don't think it is. I think it's a technology that can certainly help. Because it's the way we kind of analyze engagements. Is it a fragmented system? Is it siloed? Is there low trust? And do you need transparency, right? And so if you have kind of those three factors, a blockchain technology can definitely help. From a kind of consumer perspective, I think brands are still trying to figure out, now that I've put all of this information together, like, what do I do with it? Right. And so what we've seen in our implementations is, for some of these higher end brands, for example, we're working with kind of a beef producer in the US where, they focus on a breed, Piedmontese beef. And so they want to prove authenticity. So, we're capturing like the genetics, the genotype and the phenotype. And so as part of their engagement to their distribution, they can actually prove the authenticity that this is a Piedmontese raised cattle. And so, I think food safety, it originated out of food safety. And, one of the quotes from our customers is, our consumers don't want to know, but they want to know we know, right? And so I think it's just table stakes to have food safety and tracking and tracing. But now that you're putting and cobbling all of these disparate systems together, now you're getting kind of all of these new insights, which has led us down to the path of, is a consumer actually willing to pay more for this information, or are they just demanding it? And then to your question, who pays for it? If it's a higher end brand like Manuka Honey, maybe because it is a higher quality or a high valued brand, then maybe a consumer will pay for it. But if I'm just going to the grocery store, I just expect them to know that they have that capability to trace back the food if there is a food safety issue.
I want to add to that. I think ultimately, especially when you're talking at enterprise level, a retailer or a large food producer, you need to see ROI, right? So it can't just be promises that it'll be better or Provenance will sell it. People need to see an ROI. Like there are a lot of unintended benefits that our customers have seen in terms of visibility and efficiency, right? So again, the hype cycle. It's just like after the Bitcoin bubble. I've heard metaphors or examples where, hey, it's just like the 2000 .com bubble, right? So what you're going to see is companies, getting all excited. A lot of companies started, and a lot of companies going bust. But then, if you can find meaning, and that's what we're doing, we're in a commercial search to find meaning and product market fit. That's when you're going to see, out of the not ashes. That's a bit mean, but those companies that can really provide value, that can sell to a board, that can support their customers and have versatility in that digital offering beyond only China, because there's a lot of different needs for a lot of different markets. But China matters because they are so large. That's where you'll see the truth coming out. So, yeah.
Any questions? Yep.
Is there such a thing as too much transparency?
Did everybody hear that? Yep. That's a really good question. Yeah.
Yes. There's a such thing as too much transparency. Selling to farmers, they won't even tell their colleagues how much they paid for the packaging, right? I don't want this information in the public domain around how about my market performance. I want my stakeholders to know, but not everyone needs to know everything. And the ag sector's notoriously private, right? The private individuals. So everyone doesn't need to know everything all the time. Further to that, it would be tone deaf to think my consumers or my customers' consumers need to know everything. They don't want to know all, how, they don't want to know the back of which truck it came on. I can't remember the last time I had a burning desire to know whether it was a Nolan's truck or a Lindsay truck that my strawberry punnet came on. They actually don't care.
Yes, there's definitely a case of too much transparency. So for instance, if I'm a consumer and I go to a supermarket and I see there are two apples, one came in yesterday and one came in a week ago, which one would I pay more for? Or am I entitled to a discount if this product has been on the shelf longer than the others? So I think this is a problem that a lot of enterprise companies face. If I'm a food company, I want my products to sell. I don't want it to be on the shelf for too long because I'm so transparent with the consumer. So then again, we need to think of ways, how can we motivate the consumer to buy that product that is on the shelf longer than the others? A cheaper price range maybe, offering discounts. Also, when in a supply chain, I think the end consumer, they only want to know whether the food is safe, whether it's organic, what is it exactly that you are trying to convey, right? Is it proof of authenticity, proof of origin, and is it sustainable? And in the same supply chain, there's so many people who are, paying each other invoices and everything, and you don't need to open all that information, those financial transactions to the consumer. They don't need to know who produced that apple. They just want to know whether the apple is safe to eat. So I guess it really depends on the use case as well. Yeah, so yes, there's some times where being too transparent might just bite you back, but there are ways to mitigate that risk as well. Yeah.
I think this is where it's good to dissect the word traceability. Why do we trace? For what purpose? Do we really need to trace every single thing? Do the enterprise really want to disclose everything? My example, just last month I was in Taiwan. I went to this manufacturer. I showed him, wow, using my machine, 3 seconds, I press the button, I straight away can tell you the origin, what it's made out of. They were, wow, I don't think I want to use it. But can you teach me how do I now replicate this and use cheaper ingredients to formulate the same quality? It's a reverse of using that technology. And I think every stakeholder in the supply chain has its own required ROI, what they want out of it. And I think when we look at traceability, really it's back to how do we make more out of the technology that we have. And I think that's what we as startups should be focusing a lot on helping consumers, but also equally helping the stakeholders in the supply chain.
Your question was really interesting. We were involved in an industry project about 14 years ago now around pallet tracking using RFID tags. Worked really well. It never went beyond proof of concept because, as we were told at the time, there's money to be made in pallets that go missing because they're hired out, they're an asset. So too much visibility or transparency in that instance was going to result in probably a loss of income in some ways. Yeah.
But then again, that's exactly what you asked just now about industry should pay for it or should the enterprises be paying for it. So if it's the case where it's for the larger good and you see totality of the value that goes up, then I think that's definitely the case where the industry should see value in its own sense, the ROI.
Any more questions? Just yell out because I really can't see much looking back from the stage. I'll give you a GS1 perspective on where we see the whole traceability space heading. I'm involved in a global working group looking at the future of on-pack coding. So this humble barcode that you see here is it's been around for 40 years in Australia, this year actually. We had a party, not many people came. The world of working with barcodes. But today, Woolworths launched a pilot in Sydney across 6 stores with 2-dimensional barcodes on 10 meat products that will have price, weight, batch, use by dates, and some other information in there as well. They're the first major retailer in Australia to do that, following on from a couple of others around the world. So one of the things that they see is, and that we're working on, is today you've got your point of sale barcode, you have a QR code. Some products have 2 or 3 barcodes on them. And as much as I love the humble barcode, we realise that not everybody out in the industry does. So the GS1 vision in the future, and if you Google a topic called digital link, it'll talk about how that will how we see that working, where a web syntax will be incorporated into the barcode that will satisfy supply chain point of sale needs, but also the B2C, the consumer engagement. They could scan that barcode, and it could be a QR code, a non-GS1 code. They can scan that code with their phone and get all of the engagement, incentives, or what other interactions you have. Now, it's not going to happen overnight because this one-dimensional barcode is very well embedded, but that's I guess, our vision for what we see industry working towards. I'd just be interested in what you guys see as the vision for the future in the traceability blockchain space. Is blockchain here to stay? I mean, you mentioned before that you compared it to the internet in 1994 from a technology space, but do you think we're on a road heading down that way that technology is just going to evolve?
I think you touched on something that was really important. I mean, whether we're doing it commercially or from an industry body perspective, we're searching for an elegant solution. And elegant means a lot of things for different, whether it's commercially, operationally, from a CX, from a customer experience point of view. We're looking for something that is that's elegant. And I think you really touched on that. Your question around where do we see the future? We're working on a novel business model where the producer paid model is made obsolete. We think there are other ways you can subsidize it. We think, look, it's idealistic, but we think we've got really sharp ideas around commercials that can be proven, and that's a thesis we're proving in the next, Fresh Supply Co. in the next probably 18 to 24 months to see if there's a totally different business model where smaller producers don't need to pay for it, that it could be subsidized another way and it can be consumer driven. So watch this space, yeah.
I think blockchain is here to stay. I think as providers of blockchain, we need to better collaborate together because, we're naive to think that, Ripe.io's blockchain is going to, dominate the world as much as we'd like it to. But you've got Hyperledger, you've got these other solutions that are providing traceability for food safety. And so, as a technology provider, I think we need to learn to collaborate with each other because if you're really going to provide that food safety and that traceability, we need to be able to speak to each other. I think it also, because of the nature of it being able to share information in one record, I think you're going to start to get to, which I think we've all kind of touched on a little bit, is kind of the personalization of the message to the consumer, right? We're not here today, but that kind of, the technology will allow for that. And we're kind of generally trying to answer what does the consumer want. I think you will get to a point where you will be able to personalize a message to a consumer. Now, whether that's a QR code, hard to say what that will be, but I think that this technology enables that. And I think as a technology provider, we need to kind of lift the supply chain or the food industry, the ag industry, and collaborate together to be able to solve kind of the bigger problems.
Adding to that, PwC ran a global survey of 600 executives, and about 84% said that companies are already implementing or strategizing a blockchain implementation project. So that's 84%, and Gartner forecasts about $3 trillion. The blockchain industry is going to generate about $3 trillion worth of value. And for me, I've been working in VeChain for the past 2 years, and every day I have leads coming, knocking on my door, asking me how can I implement a blockchain solution. And at VeChain, it's not just food traceability. We're looking at sustainability as well. In the Republic of San Marino in Italy, where we've just signed an MOU, we're going to incentivize citizens there to be sustainable. We're going to reward them with a native token. In China, BYD, they're launching a D-Link, which is actually like an open platform inside the cars. It's a marketplace for hybrid car owners to have accessibility to apps. And VeChain and DNVGL, we've created a carbon credit ecosystem. And we're trying to tackle the fact that a lot of hybrid car drivers are they're very reliant on petrol and not yet on electric. And so I think blockchain is here to stay, even if it's, especially in food traceability and sustainability, I think this is the future. Again, it requires a collaborative effort between all the stakeholders, but this technology is going to open up a lot of new business models, especially when it comes to tokenization and incentivizing everyone to do their part. So I think blockchain is definitely here to stay. It's not just a hype.
I think blockchain has uncovered a lot of potential. Whether blockchain will stay, or even QR code, or whatever that we can think of in the next few years to come, what will stay in our vision is that the cost of finding out the root cause and the root source of where it comes from should drop. And I think the vision of what we think in the long run, right, should be that it's accessible for the individuals and companies to be able to find out where the item is from.
Yep. So while I think in the near future, I think there are two real main stories. One is financial underwriting of trades, because we've got records upstream, and secondly, it'll be consumer. Those are the two big stories. Whether or not they'll do that on a tokenized environment, my bet is they won't. But hey, make bets, right? And then go take it to market and see if it sticks, right?
Yep, exactly.
Last call for questions. Otherwise, we'll bring it to a close. Would you please join me in thanking our panellists, Sarah, David, Rachel, and Alan.
Thank you.
I think that is it for up here, and drinks will be served downstairs very soon.
I've come to tell you all that
Thanks,
to come and see you tomorrow. Come and see us tomorrow, because we have an amazing keynote by Dr. Howard Yana Shapiro, one of the world's most amazing plant biologists and geneticists, and what he's got to tell you, I promise you, will make you smile and feel very hopeful. And he's a bit of a magician. We're very honoured to have him in Australia. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow, and thanks everybody for today. And is it true that the man who invented the barcode gets a cent or two every time a barcode is swiped?
No.
Is that a myth?
He didn't put a paint.
I want to meet him.
Didn't paint it. No, it was invented in the 50s. He's on holidays in the US and he drew a line with a stick in the sand and thought about it would work from there. Yeah. There's actually a really cool video on our website with Bill Pratt, who brought barcoding to Australia. He was the owner of a couple of Safeway, then managing director of Safeway supermarkets here in Victoria when it got acquired by Woolworths. He's now 94, in fantastic shape, and he speaks so eloquently about the challenges he had of introducing scanning technology into Australia. Like, government ministers didn't want to do it, the unions were against it because they thought it was going to put people out of work in the supermarkets, the scanners were going to make people go blind. So yeah, it's interesting to think about back then and see with new technology coming in the sort of arguments for and against today.
I like my story better that he's a reclusive billionaire, like just with a bank balance building by the second. But hey, let's not go there.
Originally, they only thought it was going to be adopted by about 500 or 600 grocery suppliers in the US, and it's now grown over 2 million companies around the world. So.
Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow morning.